when Putin looked west on the 24th of February 2022, he didn't see a conventional deterrence. And we are absolutely key to NATO's conventional deterrence. So the state that the military are in at the moment, it's just not right. And I know that we've got a strategic defence review that the new government have put in train, but quite frankly, we don't need to pay lots of people lots of money to tell us we haven't got enough soldiers, enough tanks, enough aircraft. What the government needs to do is, in this one case, perhaps listen to Donald Trump and spend the required amount of money on our defence to get it into a position that actually it is providing defence and security to this country, which, at the moment, if I was Putin, I wouldn't look at the UK and think, crikey, I'm not going to attack them.
There's a lot today in the paper about the sort of calibre and the clout of the British Army. We're going to look at that in some more detail. And in some wider context, 10 years ago, the Arms Trade Treaty was signed. It aimed to bring international peace and regional peace by regulating the sales of conventional weapons. With major conflicts ongoing in the Middle East and Ukraine, what, if anything, has the treaty achieved? Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is the former commanding officer of the UK's Joint Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Regiment and joins us now. Hamish, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
10 years we've had the Arms Trade Treaty. I've sort of explained what it was designed to do. Has it achieved its goals?
Well, I think it's a really, it was a good start. The trouble is, it's the sort of people who you don't want to sell arms to who are not members of the treaty. All those ones that naturally spring to mind, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans. And they're quite happily selling weapons and giving weapons to each other. I've got a particular instance at the moment. I'm trying to get a load of respirators, gas masks to the front line in Ukraine. But despite the fact these are sort of non-lethal bits of equipment, they are designated as military equipment. It's already taken me over 10 weeks to get an export license for it. So when it comes to countries like the UK, yeah, it works very well because we play by the rules. Unfortunately, there are too many people out there who don't play by the rules. But it is a start. 10 years before we had no regulation, and there are well-reported instances where perhaps, at the moment, the UK is not selling certain weapons to Israel. So it does work in some form. But unfortunately, those people you really don't want these weapons, just ignore it.
Yeah, well, maybe that was an inevitable feature of this treaty. Talking about making things work, the size and the sort of the capability of our own army, Hamish, today makes the front page of the Times. And I've just been speaking to James Heappey, the former Armed Forces Minister, who said what we probably needed was an army the size of about 85,000. This is because we've currently got an army about 71,000, and a fifth of those forces can't be relied on to fight because there's sort of medical exemptions. Do you feel that even 85,000 would be sufficient?
Well, I sort of agree with James. 85,000 at the moment, with what's going on in Ukraine, with potential that we might have to fight the Russians ourselves, would be a bare minimum. And to have 25% undeployable, I mean, that is remarkable. In my 25 years in the army, I think it was about 10%. So what's happened in the last 10 years? Who knows? But I think it's a real wake-up call for this new government that actually they've really got to take defence very, very seriously, because for it is more likely we're going to need our military, our army now and in the next few years than probably in the last 50 years. And it's something that, when Putin looked west on the 24th of February 2022, he didn't see a conventional deterrence. And we are absolutely key to NATO's conventional deterrence. So the state that the military are in at the moment, it's just not right. And I know that we've got a strategic defence review that the new government have put in train, but quite frankly, we don't need to pay lots of people lots of money to tell us we haven't got enough soldiers, enough tanks, enough aircraft. What the government needs to do is, in this one case, perhaps listen to Donald Trump and spend the required amount of money on our defence to get it into a position that actually it is providing defence and security to this country, which, at the moment, if I was Putin, I wouldn't look at the UK and think, crikey, I'm not going to attack them.
Yeah, I mean, the government just don't seem to be convinced of that. They've said they'll raise spending to defence about to 2.5% of GDP after the spending review. I mean, Hamish, the argument that you've laid out, Keir Starmer's heard that, the Chancellor's heard that, the Defence Minister, the Armed Forces Minister have heard that, and they'll say there just simply isn't enough money. We've got a £22 billion black hole.
I know. I mean, it is ridiculous. I expect if the army was part of Unison or Unite and, had a trade union to bully the government, they might be in a slightly different position. I know it's a crass thing to say, but when you look at some of the other sort of government organisations and you look at some of the other pay deals that have been done recently, when it's looked at the MOD, a soldier has got in this latest pay rise, has got a real increase in pay of about 1%. You just have to look across at, say, the train drivers who've got plus of 10%. And then the stories of the accommodation that our soldiers have to live in, the terms and conditions of service. Having been a soldier and still knowing a lot of soldiers, they're all feeling pretty unloved at the moment. And, it's a really Tommy this, Tommy that moment. We actually relying on them far more than we have in the last 50 years. So I think the government might say there's not enough money and they might not be under pressure from the unions to help the military out. But quite frankly, if we get this wrong, everything else vexing us at the moment could become horrifically irrelevant.
We've had a few messages in, actually, from people, reservists or people who've had experience in the armed forces, just like you or some of your former colleagues, who've said, actually, there seems to be this real headache of admin, trying for 12 months to rejoin as a reservist and just finding that the process is so torturous and painful that people give up. I mean, that is a real failing.
Oh, it is. I mean, I've sponsored a whole lot of young boys and girls who tried to join the army, and the average time it takes from expressing interest to getting in is about 18 months. And if you're a 22 or 23-year-old, that is a lifetime. And 75% of them, in fact, a study done by the Times, I think 6 months ago or so, give up. And that is ridiculous. That's why our recruiting really needs to be improved. There's no shortage of young men and women in this country who want to join the military, and it is a fantastic career. But if you make it so difficult, it's no surprise that they decide to go off and be, Deliveroo drivers rather than tank drivers. And it's something the government have got to take seriously because, the number one priority, and Keir Starmer just doesn't understand this. His number one priority is the security and defence of this country. And at the moment, he is just not putting it as the number one priority. And crikey, if we do have to fight the Russians in Europe next year, we could be found wanting.
Hamish, thank you. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former British Army officer.